Open your Bibles to Esther chapter 4. Esther chapter 4. What? No, I don't have any slides. So, short little chapter. At this time in the Persian Empire, there was about 50, the scholars estimate that there was probably around 15 million Jews all spread out in their kingdom. Does anybody know approximately how far their kingdom spread from east to west? How far? Yeah, from India all the way down to Ethiopia. It was vast. So even when the Jews heard this proclamation, where could they go? I mean, they really just couldn't go anywhere. First off, they're slaves to the kingdom in a sense, but there's no place to go anyway because they're all pretty much of the whole known world. So in this empire, the responses to Haman's decree varied. Haman and the king, when they sent out the proclamation, what did they do? Yeah, they drank, sat down, had a little feast. The Jews, they were scared and wailed and were mourning. What about the people in the capital city of Susa? How did they react to this declaration? Confusion. Why is this happening? How about Queen Esther? She didn't know. We're going to talk a little bit about that also in this chapter. She didn't know what was going on. And then there's Mordecai. He is able to actually do something. Look at verses 1, 2, and 3. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. He went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. In each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. So Mordecai, he puts on the sackcloth and the ashes. He's crying out about this. He's taking this to the palace, but he can only go as far as the king's gate. Why won't they let him in? Because he's wearing sackcloth. But why? Why can't he go in with that on? Not appropriate. Do you think that the king is kind of isolated and obtuse to the plights of the people of his land? Yes, I agree. And he doesn't want to hear any bad things about his decision. If his decision created hardship, he doesn't want to know about it. In his mind, everything's going well.
As most kings or queens were. I mean, this isn't just him.
No, this isn't just him. Yeah, this is going to be anybody. They make a decision, best decision on the face of the planet. That's right. Let them eat cake. Where was I? So he goes there. He's at the gate. They won't let him in. And at verse 4, it says, Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her. And the queen writhed in great anguish, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Now, so I think in chapter 2, we learned that Mordecai, he's there checking on Esther quite a bit. I think her group of people know him pretty well. We know Hathach knows him. He'll come into the scene here in just a moment. But she's worried about him and sends some clothes down so that he can take off the sackcloth and come in. He refuses them. This is our first sign that she doesn't quite know what's going on. So verse 5, she summons Hathach from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So she doesn't understand. She doesn't know what's going on. She's in the palace and she has no clue. So Hathach went out to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go to the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people. We learn quite a bit about Mordecai and his position. So he knows more about what's going on than Esther and the eunuch and others as well. But what else is interesting that he has that most people wouldn't? A copy of the edict. How many copies do you think they made and sent out? Not too many. I mean, I'm sure there's hundreds. They sent them out to all the provinces. But for him to get a copy of it, that's got to put him someplace pretty high on the officials. And he knows how much money Haman got or gave to the king in order to make this go through. He's well versed on things happening in the government, especially up there at the palace.
I was going to say, he's pretty plugged in.
Yeah.
We've seen that in previous chapters. He's pretty plugged in, shall we say, politically.
Well, and, with the king's officials who talk to him about why aren't you bowing down to Haman? So he's in the know. He's at a high official state. So he's up there. And so he has this, and he goes straight to the one person who can bring this to the king, Queen Esther. So he implores Hathach to go and tell her these things so that she can do something. So he brings word back to Esther there in verse 9. And Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. I want us to examine this for a little bit. So this is her response. This is the first time Esther heard about this. How old is Esther? About? Young? Teens, 20s, maybe at this point 20 perhaps. She's young. Do you think at this point, she's been queen for maybe a couple of years perhaps. Do you think she has a little bit of an understanding of how the politics works in the palace? Some at least. Surely she's learning how things work. When she was brought in, she was very pretty. I'm sure she had the king's attention for a while. When was the last time the king called her? 30 days. Do you think that's a long time for the king to ignore the queen? Maybe there's a bit of a falling out there. What's going on?
Didn't he do the previous? Wasn't it a longer time with the previous queen?
I don't remember.
Like chapter 1.
Yeah, he does. He's got a lot of women. But if you're young, the king hasn't called you for 30 days, and then you find out that he just sent out an edict to have all the Jews killed in a year. You're a Jew, but he doesn't know. At least you think he doesn't know. Maybe he does. Maybe he does know. Maybe this is his way to get rid of you. Do you think that he is the only one who might want to get rid of Esther? I don't think he does. We know he doesn't, but she may be thinking that. But you think there's other groups that might want to get rid of Esther? Vashti would like to get rid of her. Do you think she still has people loyal to her inside? Do you think Esther may know these things as well? So things aren't looking great. And we're going to talk about that too here in a moment, because even if she stays silent, as soon as Vashti learns about what's going on, she's going to have her people make sure she dies. I can't say that for certain, but that's going to be my guess, because I know how those politics work in those palaces. And I also know she is going to come back later on with her son. So she's a little worried. Now, we give her a bad rap. Is Esther talking to Mordecai face to face? Have you ever misinterpreted an email or a text because you don't see the emotions or hear the inflection of a person's voice? Yes. So she's just getting this from Hathach. She's not getting to talk to Mordecai face to face. If I had to guess, she is looking for advice. What should I do? If I go in there, chances are I'm dead. What am I going to do? If I don't do anything, I'm dead. So they relate these words back to Esther, or back to Mordecai. And here's what he says in verse 13. Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Now it does sound pretty negative, but I think he's giving the advice she's looking for. He's not hammering her for her response. I think he's letting her know, okay, if you don't say anything, you know what's going to happen. He's reminding her of this. You know what's going to happen. God will bring deliverance from somewhere else. You and your household will come to destruction. I don't think Esther is ignorant in what's happening here. She's dead, no matter what. If it's not the king, it's going to be someone else. She's not going to make it. And I think he's answering the advice. I think he may be giving her a little bit of a firm hand, but I think she's laying it out. And he's telling her there at the end, who knows whether you not attain royalty for such a time as this. This is why you're here. And then her very next response isn't, to try to placate or try to find another way out of it. She immediately makes the decision. If I perish, I perish. When she comes back, she hears what he's got to say, verse 16. Go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way, and thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. Now, that does not sound like a girl who was just a moment ago thinking, I don't want to do this. I think it was the statement of a girl who needed some advice, got good, clear, evident advice from him of what to do, and she made a decision of what she's going to do. That's what I think. I don't think this is a girl who's wishy-washy.
I think she's pretty smart, too, as we'll see in later chapters.
Yeah, she's very wise. We'll see that later on when she goes through with this. This isn't somebody who just doesn't know what's going on, as we sometimes play her out to be. This is a young girl indeed, but she's got a lot on her plate, and she's looking to Mordecai. I think she wanted him to have the clue. Come on up here and talk to me face to face, but he won't do it. And so she's looking for that help. Jim.
This is a pretty amazing conversation to have through a third party.
Yeah.
A third party pagan person.
Well, who we think. It could be a Jew. We don't know. He may know who Esther is from this whole time, but he was appointed by the king. But Jews a lot of Jews were appointed into the higher ups within these palaces. Remember Daniel and his 3 friends and the other Jews. There had a lot of intelligent people there.
None of them were eunuchs.
Daniel was. Yeah. Daniel's a eunuch. So chances are his friends were too, we assume. And so, yeah. And so this guy could be. And a lot of the scholars I read, they all assume he is. I don't know if he is or not. But they all assume that he knows that Esther is a Jew. But if you think about it, though, how would you not make the connection that she's a Jew? When she was over there in chapter 2, who was over there at the gates looking in on her all the time? Mordecai. I mean, there's going to be people who are going to put 2 and 2 together and figure this out. I would not be surprised the king never figured it out. He seemed to be quite aloof to things. But I see all this playing out and coming out the way in this way where she sees what's going on. She's just looking for advice. But when we first meet Esther and Mordecai, they were hiding their identity as Jews. Now Mordecai is now enlisting other Jews in the struggle against Haman. Esther, perhaps maybe even this other court official, if he is a Jew. Esther is commanding her Gentile ladies and waiting to participate in her fast as she thinks on and prays about what's going to happen. And even though the name of God is not mentioned in our text, this act of humiliation was obviously directed to the Lord and was certainly accompanied by prayer. They were just humbling themselves with fasting and nothing, but they were doing it with prayer. Fasting is useless by itself. What is the point of fasting? Why do we do that? It clears your mind. You're not so worried about the fancy cars and fancy houses and the job. You're thinking of just a few things. What's that? Bread, water. And if you're praying, the Lord. You're focusing the mind on things that matter. You're focusing the mind. And that's why you got to bring prayer into this. You keep the mind focused where it needs to be. And we often see fasting in preparation for concentrating and humbling oneself before the Lord in prayer. In Ezra 8, Psalm 35, Daniel chapter 9, Acts 13, on and on and on. But it's always accompanied with prayer fasting. And since Jews throughout the empire were already fasting and weeping and wailing, sure it wasn't difficult for Mordecai to unite the Jews in this. And this was a matter of life and death, both for Esther and for her people. And God used this crisis that Haman had created to bring something very important to the Jews. A spiritual revival. Isn't this what he wants them to do? Focus on him. And now, oh, look at this. They're doing it. All of a sudden, everyone's focused on the Lord. And it's often the case that God's people have to experience trouble before we humble ourselves before the Lord.
I think about Jewish people were exiled here. And so that was stressful. And you're going into a foreign land, you're not even been a part of a foreign land. And you still may or may not be totally accepted. And so now they're dealing with another stressor here. It's like they are just, and their reaction is in part yes for the situation, but yes in part too, because they've already been exiled out of their land.
Yeah, it's a trouble upon trouble. And to make matters worse, I think life was probably not too terrible. I mean, it's not great because they're in a foreign land, but it wasn't too terrible because when the edict came out, how did the people in the city of Susa respond to it? In confusion. Why do you want to kill the Jews? We don't understand. It's not because no one hated the Jews, it seemed, and that's to the point where they wanted them dead. And even so, that tells me that Jews were even thinking, what do we do? Why did this happen all of a sudden? And it's just, not only were we in a foreign land, now we have the death sentence on us, and we got to wait a year for it to come, but it's coming. What are we going to do? But again, here's God using this as an opportunity to really spark a revival. And how should we interpret Esther's words? And if I perish, I perish. Do these words suggest unbelieving resignation? You force me into it, so I'll do this even though it kills me? Or do we see this as trustful submission to the will of God? I'll do God's will, whatever the cost. See, when you look at it like that, it's submission to the Lord, especially when we see her later on. I don't think this is a girl who doesn't know what's going on. I think this is a girl who's young, and she was looking for some advice, and Mordecai gave it to her. And now she made a choice, and she's going to stick to it.
It's just like Shadrach.
Yeah, but if not.
To the lion's den, Lord will save us.
That's right.
Furnace.
Yeah, and the phrase, Gail was talking about the three friends of Daniel going into the furnace. Hey, you know what? Whatever you decide doesn't matter. We will serve the Lord. Whether you keep us alive or whether we die or the Lord saves us. Doesn't matter, but if not. Very good. And what all was against Esther at this point? From the human point of view, everything was against Esther in the success of her mission. The law was against her. Nobody was allowed to interrupt the king. The government was against her. The decree said she was to be slain. Her gender was against her. The king's attitude toward women was not great. The officers were against her because they did only the things that ingratiated themselves either with Haman or with the king. In one sense, even the fast the fasting would be against her, because going 3 days without food or water, how's that going to make her look? You think she's going to look pleasant when she goes before the king? Is she going to walk in there, and is he going to think the same thing as he felt with Vashti when she did things that he didn't like? Does he know that she's a Jew? Is this all a ploy to get rid of her? And when she walks in there, it just gives him a good reason to knock her out and get rid of her once and for all. If I perish, I perish. It makes me think of Romans 8:31. What shall we say to these things? Anybody know what it says? If God is for us, who can be against us? The answer of faith is nobody. Nobody. I think Esther is a woman of great faith, especially for her age, to have all this thrown on her within a moment, and then she had to make a decision right then and there. Think back to when you were 21 or 22 years old. Could you handle that much stress and make that kind of decision in that one little moment? That'd be tough. She did it. She did it. I'm impressed with Esther. And I love this section. The more I read and study it, the more I think I'm better seeing the situation of what's going on there with Esther and Mordecai and Haman and the surrounding city and the whole nation as a whole.
Mordecai did a pretty good job of raising her.
He sure did. Mordecai, when she was a really young girl, he took her on and raised her as his own, and he did a good job. Any more comments or questions on Esther chapter 4? Encouraging chapter.